So let's get into our property analysis here. Brian, what do you have for us?
Okay, so today I'm going to analyze a property. It's a 6-unit building in the city of Richmond, again, where there's rent control. And this is going to be a little bit different analysis, and we're going to talk about, actually incorporate some of the definitions we talked about in the prior clips. One specifically fiduciary, making sure that you give your buyer the proper advice whether to go forward or to kill the deal. And more importantly, caveat emptor, buyer beware. Now why I'm going to throw a lot of those definitions in the mix of this specific analysis is, one, found this amazing 6-unit building in the city of Richmond where there's rent control. And going off of the offering memorandum of the property, we saw, and we're looking at the rent roll of the property, which shows the current rents, right? But in the fine print, it says assumes Section 8 market rent, right? Now, right next to the pro forma market rent. Now, those are some significant points here. So we look at the rent roll of the offering memorandum, we add up the rents, and we get a grand total of current actual $10,285 a month, $123,420 a year. So that's actually a pretty good income. Now, the market rents for these units are $2,195. These are 2-bedroom, 1-bath in the city of Richmond. So there is rent control in Richmond, again. And if you just took the actual market rents and you applied them to all 6 units, then instead of $10,285 a month, you really have $13,170 a month, or $158,000 a year. So there's a 20% loss to lease there. However, at the asking price for the property, which was $1,325,000, this wasn't such a bad property. In fact, it was a pretty good property. The property was advertised at a 6% cap, whereas when I applied my own metrics or to underwriting using a 5% vacancy factor and a full 6% management fee, the cap rate was a little lower, 5.63, but nonetheless still a very good cap rate. So this property that was asking $1,325,000, we actually got it into contract for $1,315,000. So again, a big plus for my buyer going in, because by simply reducing that price from $1,325,000, not only did they have to come in with a little bit lower down payment, but when you apply a typical 30% down payment to a $10,000 less than the asking, or a $1,315,000 asking price, well, you get a very good debt service coverage, right? So that means that because of that little differential in price, the property taxes are a little bit lower. And so in prior episodes, you've heard me say that you want to look at and underwrite this from a bank standpoint, meaning what criteria is a bank looking for to determine how much of a loan they're going to give you? Well, if we just use the standard 30% down and the requirement of a 1.2% debt service coverage ratio, meaning that the net operating income, which is the current rents minus the expenses, but before making a mortgage payment, that net operating income as compared to the principal and interest payment monthly, in this case on a 70% loan to value, that net operating income is at least 120% or 20% greater than the proposed mortgage. So again, if you have a mortgage that's $10,000, you have to have at least a net operating income, or before you make a mortgage payment, of $12,000. Now, with the actuals that we got into place of being in contract for $1,315,000, and then looking at the current rents that were advertised in the offering memorandum of $123,000 a year, and then taking the actual expenses, but maybe increasing the vacancy that was used from 2% to 5%, because that's what a bank is going to use, and then increase the property management to a full 6%. Running the property at about a 37.76, call it a 38% expense ratio, we still have a very acceptable net operating income of $74,000. So when you compare that against the contract price of $1,315,000, you get a 5.63 cap. Again, not bad, not quite the 6 you're looking for, However, with that 30% down, instead of getting the typical 1.2% debt service coverage that a bank wants, we were really at 1.32. And this was based on current actuals, right? So one, that would be a great thing for a buyer to get into. The cash flow on that after making the mortgage payment is about $18,000 a year. You'd only need about $426,000 to acquire this property. And then when you apply the principal reduction, you really have an actual taxable event or income on the property of $32,000 a year. So when you compare the $32,000 a year to the $426,000 acquisition price, the down and closing, right? Now no longer using the cap rate, which assumes you bought the property cash, then you have a 7.66% return on your money. So again, all very good things to look for when you're looking at an apartment building. And then when you compare that against the market rent, again, if you have rent control in Richmond, so what is it, like 3.6 a year?
3.5%.
3.5? Okay, so I use 3.6 in my rental increases. So there's about a 20% difference between what you're currently getting and what the market will bear. Excuse me, hold on, my phone's going off. But if you were to get it up to market, then this property, using the same, just a slight increase in the expenses from $44,000 a year to $47,000 a year, now increases the value of the property to about $1,907,000. That's what it would be if it was at market rent. However, and this is where I talked about earlier about the caveat emptor, buyer beware, the current advertised income on the property, but as compared to the estoppel certificates, which is, for those of you who don't know, again, today seems to be the day for definitions. Estoppels are a up-to-the-minute, not a rental agreement, but an up-to-date document that confirms with a current signature from the tenant and a current signature from the owner what the actual security deposits are that are being held, and more importantly, the actual rents that the landlord is charging the tenants. So when we compared the estoppels to what was advertised as the current rent, we saw a pretty distinct difference. So instead of $10,287 a month, it was only $7,440 a month. And I mean, this was very disappointing because it drops that 1.32 debt service coverage ratio down to like a negative number where you're actually losing money. And that's even after putting 45% down. So instead of putting 30% down, now when you look at what the actual rents are as per the estoppels, then you have to put 45% down just to be at a break even, or a 0.9 or a 1.0 debt service coverage ratio. So there's a couple of ways to look at that. One, if you are using the actual rents, which are $7,440 or $89,000 a year, as opposed to what it was advertised at $123,000 a year, and you try to apply at least a 5 cap to your money, to the new operating income, meaning that instead of making $74,000 a year as advertised before you make a mortgage payment, you're really only making $43,000 a year. Well, then this property is only worth about $794,000. So you're overpaying for it by $520,000. You see this a lot in places like San Francisco, where people are willing to buy at a lower cap rate. In fact, the cap rate, if you bought it at $1,315,000, what we had it in contract for, then you're really coming down to as low as a 3.32% cap rate. So again, cap rates vary from area to area, because in areas like San Francisco or El Cerrito, people are willing to purchase at a lower return or a lower cap rate because they perceive a lower risk, right? In this case, we're actually going in and buying it at a lower cap rate than you would in a place that's compared to El Cerrito or San Francisco or Walnut Creek. And so, again, going back to that definition of fiduciary, as having a fiduciary to my client, I had to advise that this is a deal that we shouldn't go forward on. I mean, we looked at it a couple of different ways, like could we increase the rents, and we applied, what if we apply the current rental increases that could take place, that could actually be applied to this property of 3.6. And again, when we did that, even 3 years down the line, we're still only hitting a value of $895,000, and that's if the existing tenant stayed there. One of the things that was proposed by the agent is that, well, we can buy the tenants out or evict them. But again, as we know, and what we've heard about in prior topics, not only is there rent control in Richmond, but there's statewide rent control that's imminent. And again, it has just cause in place and things of this nature.
Well, the interesting thing is that statewide prevents any city prevents any city from imposing stricter rent controls. Now, the cities with already stricter rent controls are exempt, and they don't have to comply with, for example, Richmond at 3.5% increase does not have to allow a 5% plus CPI increase. However, the one thing in that new bill for statewide rent control is that there is a small little section there that would apply 5% plus CPI increases to government housing.
Oh yeah, that was the other aspect of this.
And that could be something that City of Richmond just simply modifies their addendum or their ordinance to adopt that, and all of a sudden it's in effect, and they could do that.
Well, a couple of the things here, when we were looking at different ways as to possibly to stay into the deal, right? We were looking at, one, banked rents, and we were looking at the fact that 3 of the tenants in this property are Section 8. Now, why that's significant is because they're government subsidized tenants where these normal rent control laws normally do not apply. However, now, with the statewide rent control that's coming into place, government agencies like Section 8 will now also be applicable. So you can't go right to market like you would normally would on tenants that are currently Section 8, which was one of the value add plays or one of the techniques that we might be able to justify buying the property and not completely losing our shirts. And in this particular case, that was no longer going to be applicable. So when you're buying property, you always got to be very technical. You always got to be look at 5 years down, 6 years down, 10 years down. And you also got to look at the fact that if some of these rental increases that were just recently put into effect that actually got it to the current rent that shows on those estoppels, which is a little higher than it was before, but isn't what was actually shown as to be current rent, then those rents might get rolled back too, and they're already low.
So it comes down to, if you're going to buy property, you need to be working with the right professionals to be looking at every aspect and looking at the property and the documentation, rent increases, leases from every possible angle, because that goes back to
the word fiduciary.
Yeah,
work with an agent who's willing to say, my commission is going to be lost in this, but I should kill the deal because you're going to lose your shirt if you buy this property. Yeah. Or at least you're not going to be very happy, right? True. It's not in your best interest. And that's really what it comes down to. So happy hunting out there for you good investors.